Hello everyone, I hope you're having a wonderful day. Today, we're going to follow Jack and Tu Tien as they bring baby Anna home for the very first time. From the nervous car ride and emotional welcome at the gate, to Anna's funny, clumsy first bath and the quiet moment when their little farmhouse finally feels like a real family home. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next stories. The morning they finally left the hospital, the world outside felt almost too bright. Jack pushed the wheelchair slowly through the sliding doors, one hand on the handle, the other steadying the bundle in Tu Tien's lap. Baby Anna was barely visible under layers of blankets, just the tip of a tiny nose and a hint of dark hair. Cool air touched their faces, and, for a second, all four of them simply paused. Jack, Tu Tien, Mrs. Ly, and the new little person who had changed everything. "We're really going home," Tu Tien whispered, as if she still didn't quite believe it. Jack leaned over her shoulder to look at Anna. "Yeah," he murmured. "We're taking her home for the first time." His voice sounded half amazed, half terrified. At the car, Jack moved like he was handling glass. He helped Tu Tien stand, supporting her with one arm while Mrs. Ly held the baby. Every step from the wheelchair to the seat felt like a small mountain. Her body was weak, legs shaky, the incision burning with every tiny movement. But her eyes stayed on Anna. "Slowly, Con," Mrs. Ly reminded. "You just had surgery, not a nap." Jack opened the door and fussed with the cushions they'd brought from home. When he finally settled Tu Tien into the passenger seat, he adjusted the belt 3 different ways to keep it from pressing on her stomach. "You okay?" he asked softly. "As long as she's okay," she said, nodding toward the back seat. They strapped Anna into the tiny car seat, fingers clumsy on the unfamiliar buckles. The baby grunted once, then drifted back into sleep, lips twitching like she was already dreaming. Jack slid into the driver's seat, but didn't start the engine right away. Both hands rested on the wheel. His eyes went straight to the rearview mirror, where he could just see the round shape of the car seat. "I've driven this road 1,000 times, he muttered. "Never like this." From the back, Mrs. Ly smiled. "You'll be fine. Just don't pretend you're still 20. He finally turned the key. The engine rumbled to life, and they pulled away from the hospital. Every bump in the road, every crack in the pavement, suddenly felt dangerous. Jack slowed long before each one, easing over them as if the car were made of eggshells. "You know there are other cars behind you, right?" Tu Tien asked weakly, glancing at the empty road. "I don't care," he replied. "They can go around." I'm not shaking her head for anyone. Outside, the countryside unfolded. Low houses, familiar trees, a strip of sky growing brighter. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt the same. They were crossing the same distance they'd driven dozens of times, only now they were carrying an entire future in the back seat. In the rear, Mrs. Ly began humming an old lullaby, her voice low and steady. Whenever the car jolted slightly, Anna made a soft noise, then settled again at the sound. The simple song wrapped around all 3 of them like another blanket. "Do you think she's too cold?" Tu Tien asked suddenly, watching the mirror. "She's wrapped in 3 blankets," Jack said. "If I add more, she'll file a complaint." "I can feel her hands," Mrs. Ly added, reaching forward to tuck the blanket tighter. "Warm and soft, she's fine. You two just breathe." They turned onto the narrower road leading to their small farm. When the gate and low fence finally came into view, Jack felt his chest tighten. The little house sat under the morning sun, the front yard still messy from the last rain. "This is it," he said quietly. "Her first home." As they rolled closer, they noticed a small crowd gathered near the gate. Neighbors stood in a loose cluster, some holding flowers, others balancing pots covered with cloth, a couple of bright balloons bobbing in the breeze. Someone had tied a ribbon to the fence post. "Oh," Tu Tien breathed. "They're here." Gratitude and worry hit Jack at the same time. It warmed him that people cared enough to come, but one look at his wife's pale face, the shadows under her eyes, told him the noise and attention would cost her. He parked just inside the gate. Before he could cut the engine, one of the neighbor ladies waved, calling out, "They're back! They're back!" The others hurried forward, stopping a respectful distance away, but close enough that their smiles and excited voices filled the air. A phone was already out, recording. Someone lifted a small bunch of wildflowers like a trophy. Jack stepped out and opened the passenger door. He offered his hand to Tu Tien, supporting her as she swung her legs out. The ground felt uneven beneath her, and her knees trembled. Greetings and questions blurred together in her ears. "Welcome home," an older uncle shouted. "Where's our little princess?" "In the back," Jack answered with a polite smile, though his focus never left Tu Tien and the baby. "Give me a second." He walked around to the other side and opened the rear door. The neighbors leaned slightly closer, curious but careful, as he lifted the car seat. Anna slept through her own welcome party, chest rising and falling under the blanket, completely unaware she had just become the center of village attention. "So pretty," someone murmured. "She looks like her mom," another said. "No, like Jack when he was small," an older neighbor argued fondly. "Same nose." Laughter rippled through the group. For a heartbeat, the warmth soaked into Tu Tien's tired body. She had watched other women bring their babies home to this gate. Now it was her turn. Voices overlapped around her. Questions about the birth, jokes about sleepless nights, offers to help. The rich smell of steamed cakes and fried food floated from the dishes the neighbors carried. "We made extra," one auntie said. "You don't cook for at least a week, lythieuca. Just eat and rest." Tu Tien tried to smile, but her head was starting to swim. The sun seemed a little too bright, the chatter a little too loud. Her body screamed for a dark, quiet room. Anna stirred in her seat, making a small noise, and the whole group instinctively leaned in. That was when Jack felt Tu Tien's fingers dig into his arm. "You okay?" he asked softly. She nodded too quickly. "I'm fine," she lied. "Just tired." He looked at her face and saw the strain behind the smile, the way her shoulders tensed with every new voice and question. She was close to her limit, even if she didn't want to admit it. Jack shifted the car seat to one arm and stepped closer to Tu Tien. "Everyone," he called gently, "thank you so much for coming to welcome our little girl. We're really touched." He let his eyes pass over the circle of familiar faces. "But our mom here just had surgery," he added, nodding toward Tu Tien. "She's very weak and hasn't slept much. If we keep her standing here too long, the doctor will scold all of us." Soft laughter rolled through the group. Mrs. Loy came forward, hands on her hips in a playful pose. "That's right," she said. "If my daughter-in-law faints, I'll march to every house and complain. You want to hold the baby later? Then let the mother rest now." Okay, we understand, someone chuckled. The mood lightened. One by one, the neighbors stepped closer just long enough to touch Tu Tien's arm or Jack's shoulder, offering simple blessings. Rest well. Call us if you need anything. She's beautiful, before slipping back toward the gate. When it finally swung shut, the yard, crowded and noisy a minute ago, felt suddenly calm. Jack exhaled. That was a lot, he admitted. He glanced at his wife's pale cheeks and tired eyes. Village baby or not, the mother is going to bed. He carried the car seat toward the house while she walked between him and Mrs. Ly, her steps slow but determined. Crossing the threshold, they were met by the familiar smell of wood and tea and the quiet of their own walls. The living room was small and neat. In one corner, near the window, stood the crib Jack had spent weeks building. The wall behind it was freshly painted a soft color. A string of slightly crooked paper stars hung above the wooden rails, and a folded cloud-patterned blanket waited inside. Tu Tien stopped and stared. You finished it, she said, voice barely above a breath. Jack scratched the back of his neck. I worked on it after you fell asleep, he admitted. I wanted it ready when we brought her home. Her fingers traced the smooth edge of the crib. For a second, exhaustion fell away, and all she felt was a deep, quiet joy. All right, Mrs. Ly said gently. You can admire his handiwork later. Bed first. With their help, Tu Tien made it to the bedroom. After days of hospital sheets, the sight of her own pillow and blanket was almost enough to make her cry. She lowered herself onto the mattress with a long, shaky exhale. Jack appeared a moment later, holding Anna instead of the car seat. Without the plastic shell, she seemed impossibly small, her tiny fingers curling around the edge of the blanket. Here or the crib? He asked softly. Here, Tu Tien answered at once, patting the space beside her. He laid the baby down, tucking a pillow behind her to keep her steady. Anna sighed, turned her face toward her mother's warmth, and relaxed completely. The afternoon passed in short scenes. A diaper changed with too many wipes, reheated food set carefully on a tray, Jack trying to answer messages while still checking that Anna was breathing every few minutes. Each time a small problem appeared, someone stepped in. Jack with his big, careful hands, or Mrs. Ly with her practical calm. As the sun slid lower, Jack stood in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, studying a small plastic baby tub he'd placed on a low table. So, he said, glancing toward the doorway where the two women watched. Who is the boss of Anna's first bath at home? You, Tu Tien replied, a faint smile tugging at her lips. Big, brave engineer, remember? He huffed out a nervous laugh. I build houses, not wash slippery humans. Mrs. Ly stepped closer to the tub. I'll supervise, she said. You do the work. That's how this family functions. They warmed the water and checked the temperature with their wrists until both women finally said, Enough. It's perfect. Jack lifted Anna carefully from the bed, holding her close as she squirmed, half awake. It's okay, sweetheart, he whispered. We're just going to make you even more beautiful. The moment her toes touched the water, Anna let out a shocked cry. Her arms flew open, and a tiny splash hit Jack's chest. Oh no, she hates it, he said, panicked. She doesn't hate it, Mrs. Ly replied calmly. She's just complaining about your technique. They formed a clumsy triangle around the tub. Jack supported the baby's head and back, his hands gentle but firm. Tu Tien, seated close by, poured warm water over Anna's legs and belly with a small cup, speaking softly to her the whole time. "You're okay, Con," she murmured. "Mom and Dad are right here. Grandma, too." At first, Anna cried and kicked, tiny feet splashing water over the edge. Then, as the warmth sank into her skin and the voices wrapped around her, her cries turned into short hiccups and finally into small, tired noises. "There," Jack whispered, relief flooding his face. "See? Not so bad." By the time they wrapped her in a towel and carried her back to the bedroom, her eyes were barely open. Her hair stood up in damp little wisps. Her cheeks were pink and soft. "She looks like a steamed bun," Jack said, grinning. "A very precious steamed bun," Tu Tien added. They dressed her in a fresh onesie. Then, for the first time, laid her gently in the crib Jack had built. Anna stirred once, stretched, and then settled on her back, arms up by her head in a pose that made all three of them smile. Jack stood on one side of the crib, one hand resting on the rail. Tu Tien leaned against the other, body tired but eyes shining. Mrs. Ly took her place at the foot, her lined face soft in the lamplight. The house was quiet, not the old, empty quiet of two adults collapsing after work, but a new quiet, full of tiny sounds. The faint whistle of Anna's breath, the rustle of her blanket, the creak of the floor as someone shifted but refused to walk away. "It feels different," Jack said at last, voice low. "Like this house was waiting for her." Tu Tien nodded. "Now it feels complete," she whispered. "Like we're really a family." Mrs. Ly smiled, her eyes glistening. "This," she said, "is what it means for a home to be alive." Outside, night settled over the farm, hiding unfinished chores and worries for another day. Inside, under the soft glow of the lamp, 3 generations stayed close to one small crib. Hearts finally beginning to rest in the quiet knowledge that they were exactly where they were meant to be. On the morning they finally leave the hospital, Jack drives painfully slowly, terrified of every bump in the road as tiny Anna sleeps in the back seat and Mrs. Ly hums to keep her calm. When they arrive at their small farm, a group of warm-hearted neighbors are waiting at the gate with simple flowers, homemade food, and blessings for the new baby. Their joy touches Tu Tien, but her aching post-surgery body and lack of sleep quickly make the noise overwhelming. Sensing this, Jack gently asks everyone to let the young mother rest, while Mrs. Ly smooths things over with light jokes. Inside, the family gives Anna her first bath at home, fumbling and laughing through every step before laying her in the crib Jack built. That night, 3 generations quietly watch her sleep, feeling the house finally come alive.